And you woke up today to a big surprise because the United States Supreme Court just sided with Donald Trump to deport 500,000 people that are here legally. No, says Trump, all of you Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans, not by case, that you just left and the reason you were given temporary protective status by the Biden administration and other administrations in the first place.
The Supreme Court just dropped the gavel on 500,000 lives. Justice Jackson says they've ignored key laws and caused irreparable harm. But here's the wild part. This fight isn't even close to being over. Want to hear her fiery dissent? Keep watching. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now back to the video. Did you know the Supreme Court just gave the green light to deport 500,000 legally documented immigrants? Yeah, you heard that right, documented, not unauthorized or hiding. These are people who have been following the rules, living in the US under a program that was supposed to protect them. So how did the highest court in the land decide that ripping their lives apart was the way to go? Let's break it down. First, let's talk about this little-known thing called Temporary Protected Status, or TPS. It's not some shady loophole or a handout. It's a legal immigration status the government gives to people whose home countries are dealing with catastrophes.
Under temporary protective status to allow them to work here, to live here with a sponsor while they seek asylum and other permanent legal status. It appears to be a 7-2 decision, but with a stinging rebuke and dissent written by Ketanji Brown Jackson. But en masse, you're leaving. You're leaving your friends and family behind, and you're going back to war-torn countries.
Civil wars, earthquakes, hurricanes, you name it. It's basically the US saying, hey, your whole country is on fire. Maybe stick around here for a while until things cool down. This program has been around for decades, and here's the key part. The people under it are vetted and authorized to stay here. They work, they pay taxes, they're literally documented. It's like they did everything the get in line crowd loves to chant about. And yet, here we are. Now, the Supreme Court's new ruling has thrown all of this into chaos. In a 7-2 decision, the court said these folks can be deported even while their appeals are still pending. Let me put that into plain English. You could be in the middle of arguing, please don't send me back to a country devastated by a hurricane, and the government can still ship you out before they even finish hearing your case. Fair trial? Barely. What makes this more outrageous is that this overruled a lower court's decision to block the deportations, which had at least granted a stay while everything was being reviewed. So, you might be wondering, how does the government justify rushing people out the door like this? Their argument boils down to what they call a burden. Apparently, letting 500,000 legally documented people stay while their cases proceed is just too much to handle. You know, because paperwork and processing times are way more important than keeping families together or ensuring someone doesn't get sent back to extreme danger. Wrangling that supposed burden was apparently worth more weight than the livelihoods uprooted in this decision.
I'm Michael Popak. Let's dive into the new United States Supreme Court decision. This case came out of Massachusetts up to the First Circuit, which refused to grant a stay, but now the Supreme Court, at least apparently on its face, has granted a stay.
He's married, has kids, owns a home, and runs a small business. His entire life is here. Now, Eduardo faces the possibility of being sent back to El Salvador, a place he hasn't called home since he was a teenager. And what's waiting for him there? Rampant gang violence and an economy that's been in shambles since before he left. So the question is, how does uprooting someone like Eduardo help anyone? If anything, it just wrecks one more family and leaves more people grieving the loss of stability and safety. Here's where this takes an even more political turn. This ruling is being viewed as a major win for Trump's immigration agenda. Remember how his administration tried making life as difficult as possible for people like TPS holders? They slashed protections and pushed for mass deportations, calling programs like TPS temporary, and questioning why people were still here decades later. Well, even though Trump is out of office, his legacy seems alive and well in this Supreme Court decision. The ruling is a giant leap toward dismantling protections for immigrants across the board. But let me make this crystal clear. This isn't just about TPS. What the court decides here sets the tone for immigration cases going forward. If the government can justify prioritizing bureaucratic convenience over human lives, who's next on the chopping block? This ruling could impact millions of immigrants who have sought safety or opportunity in the US. It's a domino effect waiting to happen. So who exactly is getting thrown under the bus, and why does it feel like such a betrayal? It's not just about legal jargon or bureaucratic burdens anymore. It's about values, or the lack thereof. Stay tuned, because the communities hit hardest by this decision might not be who you'd expect. Imagine voting for someone who promises to protect you, only for them to turn around and make your life a living nightmare. That's the reality for hundreds of thousands of immigrants affected by this Supreme Court ruling. The court's decision hit some of the most resilient communities in the US: Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. And let's be clear, these aren't people living in the shadows. They are documented and following the system. Many of them fled unimaginable conditions, brutal governments, poverty, disasters, and built lives here. They work, they pay taxes, they contribute. And now, thanks to this decision, they're facing the possibility of being uprooted for no better reason than politics. Now, here's where it gets really bitter. A lot of these folks actually supported Trump in previous elections. You might be thinking, wait, what? But yes, groups like Cuban Americans and Venezuelan Americans, especially in places like Miami, rallied behind Trump. His tough rhetoric on places like Cuba and Venezuela made them believe he was on their side. They thought he got it, that he understood the pain of escaping a failed regime. Some even saw him as a defender of freedom, the guy to stick it to authoritarian leaders they left behind. But fast forward to now, and who's standing in the fallout of this decision? That irony doesn't taste great, does it? And for many supporters in these communities, this ruling feels like betrayal served cold. It's as if they backed someone who promised them protection, only to discover a door slammed in their face. What makes this all the more tragic is the emotional toll. These are real people with real families, parents who have been working and saving to send their kids to good schools, kids who barely even know the countries their parents might now be forced back to. Imagine a child losing their mother or father to deportation, or worse, both parents, and suddenly having to figure out what home even is without them around. These are heartbreaking realities for the families affected, and the fear is like a constant shadow. Take the story of Maria, a TPS holder from Nicaragua. She came to the US 25 years ago after fleeing political chaos. Maria works as a nurse. She's been taking care of Americans during some of the country's darkest times, including the pandemic. She's married, her kids were born here, and she's built a home in Florida. Her youngest doesn't even speak much Spanish because, let's face it, their life isn't in Nicaragua. It's here. Now, with this ruling hanging over her, the thought of being sent back to a place she barely recognizes feels like a cruel punishment. And for what? What's the gain here? Certainly not fairness or justice. And doesn't this all clash with the values America claims to stand for? The base of the Statue of Liberty famously says, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." Those words have been held up as a beacon for people seeking peace and opportunity, but if you compare those ideals to this ruling, it's hard to see the connection unless we're talking about wiping our feet on that plaque before walking past it. Instead of freedom, this feels like the country turning its back on its promises, its values, and the very people who believed in them. Then there are the political implications of all this. Let's not pretend it's some coincidence. Even though Trump is out of office, his immigration agenda still seems to be running the show. This decision lines up perfectly with the policies his administration championed, which aim to slash protections for immigrants under TPS as much as possible. It's the same agenda trying to push the narrative that temporary means you can send people back, no matter how long they've lived here or how unsafe their home countries still are. And now, thanks to this ruling, those policies have the Supreme Court's blessing. It's a legacy of fear and instability that lives on, even with a new administration. Here's another thing to think about. This ruling wasn't just a one-off. It sets a precedent, a legal snowball that could roll over millions more immigrants in the future. Today, it's TPS holders. Tomorrow, it could be any group whose protections suddenly become inconvenient. That's the real win for Trump's agenda. Not just taking aim at these specific people, but creating a legal framework that makes it easier to target others down the line. It's a strategy with ripple effects, and rest assured, it's not going to stop here. So let me ask, did the court really follow the law with this decision, or was this just politics dressed up in legal robes? Justice Jackson didn't hold back. In her stinging dissent, she accused the majority of failing to deliver justice, plain and simple. At the heart of her argument, she took aim at the so-called Nikon factors, a legal framework that's supposed to guide the court in deciding whether to let a government action proceed while further appeals are pending. According to Jackson, the court's majority didn't just misapply this framework, they completely fumbled it, and for people following the law and living under temporary protected status, that botched approach could spell life-altering consequences. So what are the Nikon factors? No, it's not some camera company checklist. It's a legal test built around 3 main points: whether the side asking for a stay is likely to win on the merits, whether the issue is significant enough for the Supreme Court to eventually review, and whether denying a stay would cause irreparable harm. These factors are supposed to be weighed carefully, key word being carefully, but Justice Jackson argued that the justices in the majority treated them more like suggestions scribbled on the back of a cocktail napkin. Her words, not mine. She called their reasoning a back-of-the-napkin assessment, slamming the process as sloppy and rushed. Here's where Jackson really turned up the heat. She pointed out that the government didn't carry its weight in showing that keeping these people in the US temporarily would harm anyone. The court has plainly botched this assessment today, she said, ripping apart their logic. She didn't mince words either when she wrote, "The court requires nothing next to nothing from the government with respect to irreparable harm." Think about that. When the government says, actually it would be a real inconvenience to not start deporting people now, the court somehow let that fly without much challenge. Meanwhile, the people on the other side, the ones about to be sent away from their families, jobs, and communities, are staring down harms that aren't just irreparable, they're devastating. Jackson made it crystal clear where the real stakes lie. Nearly 500,000 people, many of whom have lived in the US for decades, will have their lives torn apart because of this decision. These aren't nameless statistics. These are parents, homeowners, churchgoers, neighbors, the guy who works overtime at your favorite diner, or the nurse who just treated you at a doctor's visit. But somehow, according to the court, their pain and suffering, a practical upheaval of their entire lives, didn't outweigh the government's so-called burden of dealing with it. The court's priorities, as Jackson saw it, were grossly misplaced. Now, let's not overlook the broader implications here. In her dissent, Jackson isn't just addressing the technical issues with these Nikon factors. She's pointing out something bigger: the human cost. She flat out said the decision undervalues the devastating consequences of allowing the government to precipitously upend the lives and livelihoods of nearly 500,000 non-citizens while their legal claims are pending. Pause for a second to let that sink in. This isn't just a matter of scheduling or case management. These people are hanging by a thread, unsure whether today might be the day they're yanked from everything they've built. And yet, the court's focus was more on bureaucratic hassles than humanity. It's almost impossible to look at this ruling and not wonder if politics overshadowed principles. Jackson doesn't outright say it, but her dissent raises serious questions about the court's priorities. Are these justices taking their cues from legal precedent or from a political agenda? Because let's be honest, the whole thing reads as if the majority rubber-stamped Trump-era immigration policies, giving his anti-immigrant agenda a second wind. And here's the kicker: those policies are the very ones that sought to make life as hard as possible for TPS holders, the same people now at risk of being forced out of this country. Let's also not forget the sheer irony at play here. The court's supposed purpose is to weigh things fairly, to hold the scales of justice for everybody, but in Jackson's view, these scales weren't balanced at all. Instead of protecting those who followed the law and lived here under government-granted protections, the majority decided to side with, what, convenience? Efficiency? If that's the standard now, then what does it mean for anyone hoping for their day in court going forward? In the end, Jackson's dissent is more than just a critique of legal missteps. It's a call to remember what fairness in the justice system is supposed to look like. Her words are a reminder that the court's job is to protect the powerless, not to prioritize bureaucratic minor inconveniences. That quote again: the court requires nothing next to nothing from the government. If that's okay, then how far will this precedent stretch down the road? Today it's 500,000 people with TPS. Tomorrow it could be another group with even fewer protections. This dissent isn't just a footnote in some legal textbook, it's a warning, a loud one. Jackson's argument shines a spotlight on the very real, very human cost of prioritizing politics over people. And maybe, just maybe, it's also a rallying cry for anyone who believes that the justice system should actually deliver justice. Her words shouldn't just be read, they should be heard, loud and clear. This latest Supreme Court ruling isn't just about the 500,000 people under TPS, it's about the entire future of immigration immigration in America. It sets a precedent that could unravel protections for millions more, all in the name of politics. But here's the deal, this isn't the time to sit back. Stay informed, vote in every election, not just the flashy ones, and support groups fighting for immigrant rights. Justice Jackson's fiery dissent reminds us that fairness isn't completely out the window. The fight's far from over, and if anyone can shift this narrative, it's people who refuse to stay silent.